Hello, welcome to a new video. Today it's that time where I share with you my favourites and my worst or most disappointing books that I read in 2023. So I know some people do these as separate videos. I always do these as one video, but I do understand not everyone wants to see the negative, so I will be putting the chapters in. So if you want to skip to just the favourites, you can. I'm not going to be offended, I promise. But we're going to start with the worst and most disappointing. I only actually have 7, and these aren't all bad books. They just weren't for me. And this doesn't include any DNFs. So DNF'd a few books for different reasons, but these are just the ones that stand out to me. So first up, this was the first read of 2023, and it really set a great standard for the year that I was worried about. It's Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo. This was a 2-star for me. I hated it so much that I have unhauled every Leigh Bardugo book I owned, and I refuse to read anything by her ever again. She ruined this series for me. I know there's some people that loved this book. That is absolutely fine. You do you. I'm not going to yuck someone else's yum. However, I hated the direction she went in. I hated the trope and the way the trope was executed. I just hated everything about this, and I refused to read anything. And I still have not watched Shadow and Bone season 2 because I'm still so angry at this book that I can't bring myself to watch it, which is a shame because I loved season 1. And I loved this whole series and this whole world before reading Rule of Wolves. So thanks, Leigh Bardugo. You suck. Next up was The Handover by David M. Barnett. So I was a guest on Lisa and Jem's podcast, the Barely Adulting podcast, and we read this. Now this is a romance. I'm using that term loosely. This is a romance written by a man, and we read it because we didn't want to judge a book by its author. We should have. This was terrible. There was racism, there was fat phobia, internalized fat phobia. Was there homophobia? Possibly, I can't remember. I hated this book so much, and it had so much bad with it. This is one book I would not recommend to anyone, and anyone that has read this, I'm sorry you wasted your time with it because this was just not good. So yeah, I just hated this book so much, and it's really made me not want to ever read a romance by a man again. And I know I shouldn't tar all authors with the same brush, but I kind of want to. We'll see. Next up was another book that finished a series and finished my want to read this author, but not on the same level as Rule of Wolves. So Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor. Okay, so I didn't hate this book. This was a 3-star for me. I was very disappointed though. I did not enjoy the way this series ended, and I was honestly so bored for most of this book. And it was just such a shame because I loved the first book. The second book was okay, but then this one I was really hoping would bring it back, because the second book I felt really suffered from middle book syndrome. So I was like confident that the final book would bring it back and it'd be great. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a terrible book. I was just bored. I know plenty of people that do like this series, but then I've also been told by a lot of people who are fans of Laini Taylor's work that she just cannot end a series. So maybe it's not just me. I just really did not like it, and this wasn't a worst book. This was just a disappointing read for me. So yeah, not a worst book, but it's still disappointing. Next up was Only a Monster by Vanessa Len. I did give this a 3-star, but it was very much a lower end 3-star, and it was very much I was really excited for this book. I'd heard lots of great things about it, and it sounded amazing and right up my street, and then I read it and I was just like, is that it? I literally have no interest to pick up the sequel. Like, I'm DNFing the series. I was just so incredibly bored, and I was like, why am I doing this to myself? I nearly DNF'd it at a few points because I was that bored, but I was like, no, because it's not bad. But then looking back, I do think it wasn't that great, and I don't know why people were rating it so highly and like raving about it, because I think that might have been where my disappointment has come from, because I was expecting this amazing book and it was just mid. It was okay. Next up is one that a lot of people might be annoyed about, and I'm going to explain my reasoning, and I'm not saying don't read this book, and I am not DNFing the author, because I've read two of the other books by this author and loved them, and I will be continuing to read the books. But Beach Read by Emily Henry, I hated this. This deals with a trope. Now, the trope does not centre around the two love interests. It centres around the parent of a love interest, but I hated how it was handled and how it tried justifying something that parent had done. And the parent had done something that you can't justify it. It's unforgivable, and that person's trash. I hated it. I was really enjoying it up until that point, and it was just a massive disappointment for me, and I hated it. So when I recommend Emily Henry stuff, I will say anything but Beach Read. So yeah. Next up was The Dance Tree by Kilran Millward Hargrave. Now, I think this was either 2 or 3 star. I didn't hate this book. However, it has a trope that I absolutely despise. And again, it tries to justify it. And there's no justifying it. I'm sorry. Stop it. Stop that right now. And this was more of a disappointment, because everything I've read by Kilran Millward Hargrave, I've absolutely adored. And the thing is, I was going to DNF this the moment that trope come into play, but her writing is so beautiful that I just had to keep reading. I wish I hadn't. I'm not going to lie. I would rather this be a DNF, but her writing's so good, which says a lot for her, but it just means that now, instead of it being a DNF, it is a on my most disappointing of the year. But it's not going to stop me from reading her books. It's just not every author can be perfect with every book. It's fine. And then finally, we have a whole series. Now, I didn't read the first book in this series last year. I read that in 2022. And then I read books 2 and 3, and then instantly got rid of the books from my house because it's the Secret Circle series. Oh boy, this series was bad. I really wish I'd never read it. I'm gonna be quite honest with you. I know people have different opinions, but this book was bad. If you like it, I'm sorry, it's bad. See, the thing is, you can tell it was written in the 90s. That was not my issue. My issue was that it was just not good. Now, I've read LJ Smith books that were written in the 90s and that were amazing. Night World. But Secret Circle just was not. It had the one trope I despise more than anything else, which seems like it's a pattern, because the last 2 books I've talked about has that trope as well. But yeah, and it was just, the ending made it so much worse. The ending made me almost throw the book across the room. I hated it with a burning passion. And I'm really glad the books are no longer in my house. So yeah. Okay, they were my worst books and most disappointing books. We're now going to move on to happier times and talk about my best books of 2023. We're going to start with number 12. So technically, I had one for every month. However, one of them is a graphic novel. If you know me, you probably know what graphic novel series. And 2 months in a row, 2 different volumes of it got there. So what I've actually done, one of the volumes I've replaced with a book I read in January that, because I read another book in January, this one was pushed out of the best spot. So we're starting with that one. And that is As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. I absolutely loved this book. It was so much darker than the other two books in the series, which I was so here for. I know not everyone was, because obviously they read this because it's a YA thriller series, so it is a little bit more tame. But I really liked how dark this one did get. I was hooked from the moment I started it until I finished it. And I am honestly so glad that I found this series years ago, because it's just so good. It's so gripping. The characters are great. It's so clever. This one especially, I did not see things coming. And I was like, what? Multiple times I gasped. And I'm here for that. Next up in 11, we have Any Way the Wind Blows by Rainbow Rowell. Look at me finishing series. Like, I've been putting this off for the longest time because I was scared. Because I loved the first two books. And I'm always scared when you get to the final book, especially after reading Rule of Wolves, which is the end of a series, and hating it. I was terrified of every end of a series I read after that last year. So I was like, don't be another Leigh Bardugo. But Rainbow Rowell did good with this one. This was so well done, and I just could not stop reading. It was so good. I love the characters, and I love seeing the progression throughout the series to then where they get to this series, and just everything that happened. I was just so happy. Did I cry? Of course I did. This is me. Are we shocked? No. Next up is one that I don't actually own, but it's Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herron Blake. I have borrowed both of these, I think, off of Ash, and I absolutely love this book. It's sapphic, it's romance, and I'm just like, I'm so here for just the family drama, the romance, the dynamics between certain characters that aren't the two love interests. And also I really like how one of the women in this is a mum who's technically a single mum because the dad is around but kind of not and whatnot. But I really like seeing the dynamic with that family. I just really enjoyed this. Next up is another romance, and it's Rosaline Palmer Takes the Cake by Alexis Hall. I absolutely adored this. So this is essentially Bake Off. She goes on this baking competition TV show. It's not called Bake Off in this, obviously, but it's great. And I really enjoyed seeing like the bi-rep in this as well. And also the main character has a daughter, and she is just amazing. She's great. Next up, it's another series ender. It's Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. Now, a lot of people said this was their least favourite in the series, and I don't know what you're going on about, because this was the best in the series. Like, I loved Chloe. Wasn't as much of a fan as like for Danny. However, that was because of a trope in it, not because of the character. I loved the character, hated the ending. This was great. I just wanted to see Eve succeed in everything, because she's just such a lovable character, and I just loved everything about this, and the romance was so cute, and I want to reread just this one. Will I? Probably. Let's be real. Next up is another one I borrowed from Ash, and it is The Mighty Known Origins, Jester Lavore. This was like one of the last books I read in the year. I love Jester. Like, Jester is my favourite character. Yes, I know she's a Laura Bailey character, so of course she's going to be my favourite. But I just loved seeing Jester as a kid and then a teenager, and then like going off on her own, which, you know, if you know Critical Role, you know that's the point where she's going to start meeting the rest of the gang. And it was just so much fun, and the artwork was great, and I love it. Next up is Something is Killing the Children, volume 6 to be exact. So volume 5 was also one of my favourites, like, of the month. But this was so good. Like, so good. And I'm going to be honest, I thought this was the final volume. I mistakenly thought this was the final volume. And I read it so excited and got to about here and realised this isn't wrapping up in this amount of time. Oh no, I messed up. And I looked, and no, the next volume, which comes out next month, is the final volume. It literally says the 7th and final volume. So, but this was so good. And I just love this series as a whole. It's just gripped me the entire time. The artwork is incredible and it's so creepy. I love it. Next up is another Critical Role book, and it is Kith and Kin by Marieke Nijkamp. This is a Vex and Vax story. Are we shocked that a Vex and Vax story ends up on my favourite books of the year? No, we're not. Again, a Laura Bailey character, but also Liam O'Brien. And it has Trinket in it. If you don't know, Trinket is a bear that they save and basically becomes their, like, I'm not going to call him a pet, animal companion. And I just love this. This takes place before they meet the rest of Vox Machina. And I just loved seeing them, and like they get separated and then they have to find each other, and I love them so much. Next up is Imogen, obviously, by Becky Albertalli. So this book made me sob because this was a love letter to every bi girl, especially bi girls that have had to be teenagers dealing with being bi and figuring out that you're bi and sharing with people that you're bi, and then having people tell you that it's just a phase. This was great. This just, you can tell this was written after Becky Albertalli was outed, because, or rather forced to come out, because it is a love letter. It's a love letter to every bi girl, and it just made my heart happy and I sobbed. So yeah. Next up, we are not shocked that an FT Lukens book is here. It's Spellbound. This is the book that came out in 2023, and me and Jem read it like almost as soon as it came out, and it's just so good. I love all the characters in all the FT Lukens books, but Sun and Rook are my favourites. They are both just balls of sunshine, and I just love them so much. Also, the story in this, I really liked how, because the other two books that we've read by FT Lukens are set in like fantasy worlds. However, this is set in our world but has magic, and I think that's another reason I enjoyed it that bit more. I loved the mystery aspect as well. It was just great. And then we have the final two. They're both by the same author. It's going to come to no surprise. So at number 2, we have Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. I genuinely was scared for this because it's a YA. And I've only ever read Ali Hazelwood's adult romance. So I was worried that I wasn't going to enjoy this as much. But she did this so well. She does like Fade to Black really well. Would I want this in her adult romance? No. However, it's a YA romance and I absolutely loved it. I want to know if she sold her soul to Crowley at a crossroad. Because surely that's the only way that she writes this well. Just saying. Also, yeah, I've been watching a lot of Supernatural lately. It's Crowley's on the brain. And then finally, you're not going to be shocked, it's Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I've read this, was it 2 or 3 times this year? Last year. It was 2 or 3 times. So I got an arc of this, and this book is the reason As Good as Dead was not my favourite book of January, because I read As Good as Dead and then I got granted the e-arc of this. I couldn't not put As Good as Dead on this list though, because I loved it so much, but there was no way it was beating this. This was obviously going to be number 1 because it's just my favourite book. I had this whole dilemma, and I have come to the conclusion this is my second favourite Ali Hazelwood. But when I first read this, I had this whole, like, breakdown. That's not an exaggeration. I almost cried. I have breakdowns for less than this, by the way. But I genuinely did not know whether this was going to be my favourite over The Love Hypothesis. I'm kind of glad it isn't, because Love Hypothesis is Reylo fanfic, and this is not. But Jack and Elsie are great. This has fake dating, but not in the way you think it has fake dating, which is great if you're not a fan of fake dating. That made no sense. I have explained it in other videos before, but I just loved this so much. Okay, so that was my best and worst / most disappointing of 2023. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite book that you read in 2023 was. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Bye.